Hi, everybody.
Hi, Andy.
Lovely to see you all. Everyone's coming through. Hi, Nigel. Hello, Girk. Nice to see you. Hello, Tom. Mike McGrath will be with us shortly, and Gareth Stears is here as well. Okay, looks like we're going to be in for a nice, cosy conversation about this film. I hope you've all seen it.
Yeah.
Very good.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. Let's get introductions out of the way first of all. We'll go to Gareth last because Gareth's our head of events and he's going to be talking through some slides about the film. So let's go to Nigel Cairns first. Nigel, please take the time to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Nigel Cairns from near Beer in Devon. I've been involved in a banking dispute for 14 years and I've recently come across TTF, which I found hugely uplifting and is assisting me in many ways.
You're very kind to say such nice things, Nigel. Thank you. Let's go to Mr. Tom Levitt.
Good evening. I'm Tom Levitt. I'm the author of a book called The Company Citizen. I've been a consultant on responsible business for the last 10 years, and I'm here in Brentford in West London, but I will be at Wembley on Saturday.
Whenever I hear the word Brentford, I always think about those old Brentford nylons adverts years and years ago. Was that the 70s or maybe even the 80s? I can't remember.
It was before my time, but the factory was actually in Isleworth. It wasn't in Brentford.
There we go. There we go. Thanks, Tom. Let's go to Girk. Lovely to have you with us, Girk. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, Gert Summer. I'm in the Clydesdale Bank Support Group. Yes, and last week I had quite a major hearing at the Court of Appeal with three of our members, all fighting against Cerberus.
Okay.
And their efforts to basically asset strip us all. So so it looks like the Court of Appeal has finally had a look at the way things have been handled and decided to put three of our cases together and hear them as a co-joined thing, which was very helpful for us, because one of the issues that we'd found was that obviously you're fighting the same lawyers that have got experience, and basically they were telling different stories to different parties and different court hearings. So by joining three of our appeals together, we managed to get a lot more information from the court, and hopefully it's worked. So we're just got to wait for the judgments to come out now, but we'll see.
Good. That's really encouraging. Keep us posted, and all eyes on your cases, your colleagues' cases. That's fantastic. Thank you. Very well done for sticking at it. From one very tenacious chap to another very tenacious chap. Mike, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Mike McGrath. I'm from Cardiff, South Wales. So, Tom, you will obviously know about the rivalry with Cardiff and Swansea. So we'll be rooting for Brentford on the weekend.
Okay.
And I'm with the Lloyd's Bank Victim Group, and I've obviously been at this for the last 14 years, as Tom have, and Nigel.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. We'll now go to Kim Schweitzer. Please introduce yourself, Kim. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Kim. Apologies for putting my camera off and on. I just got back with my dog from the vet, so I'm a little bit scattered at the moment. I am a TTF ambassador and a volunteer and founder of Time for Change London, and very interested in hearing the discussion. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see the whole movie, but my boyfriend did and he really liked it. So if that's anything, I will get back to it when I have the opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed, Kim. Let's go to Mr. Paul Carlier. I emailed Paul on Sunday because when I was watching the film on Saturday night, I kept thinking about Paul because Paul was literally working in an office next door to what was effectively a boiler room. So it's impossible to watch the movie without thinking about Paul Carlier, because I could just imagine him hearing things similar to what was being shown on the film. Paul, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul Carlier, two-time bank whistleblower, UBS and Lloyd's, and since 2016, been providing litigation support services for law firms and large businesses on large class actions globally, but more closer to home, helping victims where possible on a pro bono basis that have got issues with banks or financial firms. And as Andy said, it was doing that in 2017. We're based in a WeWork office in London, and I don't know if you've ever seen a WeWork office. They're these sort of flexible Google type workspaces, so you can have a one-man or one-person room up to a 50 person room, and they're just all divided by glass partitions. And we were next door to this firm that were promoting and pushing a variety of scam products, including the Blackmore bond. And I don't feel any sympathy for them, but what were the odds on them setting up a boiler room next door to an office that contained a dozen of, I don't know, I'll not blow my own trumpet because some of my colleagues are far better qualified than I am, but of significant experts in and investigators in terms of financial wrongdoing. And but we witnessed it all firsthand. We could see and hear everything. We reported it to the FCA, invited them to come along and see for themselves. And as probably most of you will be aware, that the FCA just ignored it. So
I think one of the big points in the film was looking at how the authorities in the film behave compared to what's been happening in the UK in similar circumstances. Yeah. It's an obvious point to make, and I'm sure Gareth will pick up on that later. Let's go to Michaela, all the way in Canada. Hi, Michaela, please introduce yourself.
Oh, hi. Well, I am glad I watched the movie because I didn't before.
Yeah.
And I believe that it is very useful to educate people. Unfortunately, it just, how can I say, it's like preaching to the choir. Probably the big majority of people are still rather ignorant, and they prefer the action and car chases and lots of dead people movies. So I don't, but the little dent it does, it's very good. I found it well done and excellent. We should have more educational movies without moralizing, because that can get the other way. People so I think it's a good thing, but I wonder about the penetration and the number of people who okay, good work, good.
Thank you, Michaela. Glad you enjoyed the film. I watched it for the first time on Saturday. I really did enjoy it. I really enjoyed it. Mr. Andy Aikenhead, a regular at our film club and book club events. Great to have you with us. Please introduce yourself, Andy. Then we're going to go to Gareth Stears, who's going to introduce himself and talk us through some thoughts about the movie. Thank you.
So good evening, folks. Andy Aikenhead. So I'm a consultant in financial services, and spent a fair bit of time in that field in various guises. Looking forward to the discussion this evening.
Wonderful, thanks, Andy. Mr. Stears, our head of events, the TTF volunteer head of events, they're doing a great job. Over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. So just very quickly about myself, my day job's in pensions, which is how I came across the Transparency Task Force, and particularly their work tackling the scourge of pension scams. But in an earlier phase of my life, I was studying film studies at university. And so on hearing this, Andy thought I'd be a great candidate to head up the film club, which is how I'm here today. Well, I mean, actually, I was already coming to the film club, and that's when Andy found out. So I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I do have a few slides. Right. So obviously, we're talking about the film Boiler Room. Quite pleased with that picture choice, personally. So just very briefly, a sort of a reminder. I know Kim didn't finish the film. Maybe people saw the film some time ago and just need to be reminded about it. So it's about this this college dropout called Seth, played by Giovanni Ribisi, who is enticed to join a brokerage firm operating just outside of New York. His job is, in a nutshell, cold calling potential investors and trying to sell them stock. Now, this is obviously a boiler room of the title, and just quickly to explain, this is simply the idea of having a room full of people on telephones using high pressure sales tactics to dupe investors into overpaying for securities. That's the essential business model. I think another important phrase to understand that might have passed you by is this idea of pump and dump. I think there's more to the scam in this film than this, but this is quite a common scam. It's artificially inflating a stock's price by using your high pressure salesman to talk it up, make out the stock is much better than it actually is. These are stocks that your company also owns. You then sell them, your stake, at the peak, and then stop talking up the stock. The people you've duped into buying these investments are left with stock that's worth much less than they paid for. So, as I say, I'm not going to go through the entire plot, but of course, the story is really about Seth discovering this con, trying to avoid jail as the FBI get involved, trying to do right by one of the people he's ripped off, trying to get him his money back, and also rescuing his relationship with his father. His father is literally a judge, which gives you a sort of an idea of the sort of meta part his father plays in the film, if you want to get into a bit of film theory. So as I say, I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I thought I'd just start by mentioning what I thought was one of the themes of the film, and then see if anyone wants to comment on that, or maybe there's something else you're absolutely dying to say. And then I do have some further slides if we run out of steam and we want to think about a different topic. But I thought if there was one overriding theme of this, is that everything is a sale. There's one quote up the top there. That's what Ben Affleck's character says at one point in the film. I'll let you just read that yourself rather than me doing a bad Ben Affleck impression. But then other parts of the film as well, I think, come under this theme. The voiceover at the beginning, the main character's talking about the American dream, the dream of becoming a millionaire. It's what every young American wants. It's what every young American is sold. The idea that if you put in the hard work, you can make it and you can have all the wealth that the American dream promises. There's also the idea that JT Marlin, the name of this firm, they sell a dream to their brokers. So these young guys coming in for the job interview, they're sold this idea that if they work and they don't complain and they don't expect to have any holiday, then they'll get to be millionaires in a couple of years' time. And then those brokers then sell on their dream to this bullet point is about their sort of experienced brokers then selling this dream on to their young recruits, and then those young recruits, it's their job to sell the dream of unimaginable wealth to these unsuspecting marks that they're targeting. So this is what I thought was quite an important piece to the film, but I'll leave it there for now and see if anyone wants to come in on this point.
Thank you, Gareth. Let's go to Ed just to give Ed a chance to briefly introduce himself, then we'll open it up. I can see Paul Carley would like to say something for a start. Ed, to you. Thank you. Just to briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, I was sorry to have missed the last film. I watched it and was very distressed of it. And I must admit that I haven't been able to watch this one, but I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's comments. And I'm calling from Nova Scotia, Canada. So talk to you all later. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you very much indeed. So what we'll do, Gareth will talk through the slides, and when it gets to the kind of the Q&A discussion bit, I'll step in there just to kind of facilitate that. Mr. Paul Carlier, I'm not surprised you've got something to say already. Go for it.
Yeah, it's quite a few years since I've actually seen the film, but I do remember it well. And but I think those slides make a good point. I mean, we've over the course of the last 6 years, we've investigated multiple cases in various product classes that involves us reviewing millions upon millions of chat transcripts. So these are the these infamous Bloomberg chat groups that people were doing all kinds of things in LIBOR, FX and bonds, etc. And obviously they're all recorded. So part of our work is reviewing this and finding the smoking guns within. But what you see is in terms of selling the dream and people crossing those lines, what you see is a tentative, people tiptoe up to the line, but they don't cross. Then targets are increased, and then people almost inadvertently cross a line, don't get punished for that, but actually that worked out well for me. So, and I got a bonus for that. So that endorses it. And bit by bit, you just see the conduct deteriorate, but all the time they're self-justifying the conduct. So they know it's wrong, but they're actually, you can see them visibly at times, like self-justifying it. And so I don't think there's the most of these people go into these kind of things with intent to do whatever and be prepared to cross whatever line needs to be crossed, in the pursuit of wealth and everything else. But there is a gradual, process that most people undertake. That said, Michael Lewis, who wrote The Big Short, he also wrote, his first book was called Liar's Poker, which is a very detailed book about bond trading and Salomon Brothers in the 80s. And it's quite intricate, but it does give a very disturbing picture of the whole bond market. Now, he confirms that he wrote this as a means to expose what was going on and dissuade people from entering this lifestyle. However, in later years, he found that many people literally took that book as an advert for that lifestyle and that career, and because of that book were following a path and trajectory towards it. So you do have people there are some that will actively pursue that kind of thing, but for the most part there's a very interesting progression towards that crossing of a line.
We'll go to Tom in just a moment. I'll just make one quick point if I may, then we'll go to Tom. I think you've mentioned something really interesting. There's a particular type of personality, male, young, competitive, testosterone charged, needing to prove himself to others, a sort of a hierarchy, a pecking order amongst peers and all the rest of it, measure themselves by how much money they've got, the type of car they drive. And these people are absolutely fertile territory for scam outfits like the one the film was all about. And there's almost an emotional need that these people have got to be that kind of person. It's really interesting because these people are dangerous. These people are dangerous. Put them in a different kind of context and they'll do all sorts of really rubbishy things. Let's go to Tom. Thank you.
2 points. Paul made the point there about people picking up on the role model and following the role model. And I thought it was a nice touch that at one point, quite early in the film, there's a television on in the background. And on the television is Gordon Gekko from Wall Street. So they were the same thing almost was happening there in a sense. The other comment I just wanted to make at this point was that as the film starts, we're seeing the high school dropout who's making a living out of running card schools, getting as many people in as possible, playing as many games as possible during the night. And as it gets bigger, he brings in people to run the card school for him, and he pressurizes them to bring him a return. And then the whole of the rest of the film is about doing exactly the same thing, playing the odds, riding the chances, and manipulating them to your own ends. So I thought what's set up in the first 10 minutes and then played out in a different format for the rest of the film, which I thought was quite clever.
I really enjoyed it. Let's go to Gareth. What are your initial thoughts about the film?
It was, like you said, testosterone driven, doesn't it? Really, it was. It's all about egos. We've got to outdo the other guy, and as Tom just said about the film Wall Street being on in the background, and these guys were all there and they knew every single word and they were saying it as it was being played out. So it was a film that they worshipped basically, and that was what was driving them forward.
Yeah, they were idolizing those characters in that film, weren't they? They really were.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
Gareth, to you.
Yeah, I might come in on that point. That was actually one slide I thought we could go to. but rather than put it up, it's just a few lines. So I'll just say them. I think that point about the reference to Wall Street, you might have missed as well. There's a less well-known film called Glengarry Glen Ross, which I think is a great film and a great candidate actually for a future film club. And Ben Affleck's character mentions this at the start, and in fact his whole speech at the start, it's been pointed out, is very similar to the opening speech from Glengarry Glen Ross, which was Alec Baldwin gave. And it's all about, and it all goes in as well with this sort of machismo point, which is that it's very sort of macho speech. It's like, you know, really going at these young guys' egos. You know, can you make it? You know, are you going to wimp out, or you know, do you have what it takes to make money and be a real man? And I think there's a great quote. I read one review of the film by Roger Ebert, talking about how a guy like Jim doesn't see the message, only the style. And that goes to Tom's point, I think, which is that these people, they see films which criticize these sorts of practices, but they don't pick up on that message. These are the people who see that, and all they see is the glamour. And it does sort of beg the question about almost sort of what we do here as a film club, you know, talking about these films. Do these films actually help? How many people are actually put off from these behaviors? Or worse, you know, how many people see films like this and just think, wow, these guys seem to be living glamorous, exciting lifestyles from, you know, criminal practices, or at least unethical practices. So, you know, are these films ultimately a bad thing? I suppose is what I'd put to the group. Do they actually dissuade anyone?
Wow. That's interesting, because I imagine any kind of normal, right-minded person who watches a film like The Boiler Room will think how horribly they treated the clients, the customers. They lied to them. That poor man, he had a wife, a lovely family, wife, young children, ended up jeopardizing the move to the bigger house because he got to invest his life savings. And that guy, the dad, was absolutely shattered and broken, wasn't he? And something else I couldn't help thinking about during the film was, God, imagine if that was, you know, we've got within the community, the TTF community, we've got many people who've had their entire life savings scammed off them in their pension funds. Imagine how bad that would be. It helps you sort of understand just how depressed and frankly suicidal some of these people get. So I would say any kind of normal, right-minded person would watch a film like that, and I would think would be disgusted, frankly, at the conduct. But I guess you're right. There's got to be a certain type of person who would actually be quite excited by that and even sort of turned on by it, because they're just is the word amoral. They haven't got a sense of right and wrong. They'll justify it themselves. But Paul, you got your hand up. Then we'll go to Nigel. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. But one thing that I've witnessed over the years as well, I've seen very good people, honest, decent people that have become, maybe, and particularly it's very true of whistleblowing, or if you work in a financial institution, the FCA introduced rules that basically said if you witnessed something and didn't report it, you became as guilty as the people that had done it. Now, that puts you in an incredibly difficult position, because you're lose-lose. Do you say something now and potentially incur the wrath, loss of job, career, etc., or do you stay quiet and then potentially get found out later? Now, it's very difficult. It's very easy to blame people for not speaking up. But when it's not always just about them. It's about their families and your children's futures. If you lose your career, it's not just about you. So, and then once people have not spoken up, I've seen people tear themselves apart because they're now in a position where they can't come forward, because if they do, the FCA will come after them for not having reported it initially. So, and we've also got to forget that all of these people that worked in GRG and BSU, for example, they're not all evil, nasty people, but what they've been able to do is compartmentalize and park empathy over here, because there's no way they don't know the consequences of the actions of what they're doing. They will know that they're putting these people under immense distress, and so it's a really interesting social dilemma in terms of that you can have normal, decent, honest people that will are able to compartmentalize in the pursuit of a career or not wanting to lose their jobs, and facilitate the destruction of people's lives. And let's be clear, these people, GRG and BSU, they know that if you go after somebody and take their homes, the consequences of that. That person's ruined potentially, not just financially, but you will know the mental pressures that heaps upon people. So it's a really, they're not all evil people, but what makes an honest person, be able to do that and compartmentalize and just justify their actions and just literally, just ignore and park all their empathy to one side in the process of doing it. I mean, it's a really interesting topic. And one thing that I've always asked is that when I made disclosures against the people involved, I understand that they are going to come at me. They've got skin in this game now. They stand to lose something. What I've never been able to square is those people that were tasked with investigating it, either in the bank or they had no skin in the game. They had nothing, and yet they chose to risk their careers by concealing and covering up what these people had done.
Yeah,
that I just don't. I've never been able to square.
Wow, really, really interesting. Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much, Nigel.
Hi. Yes, I wanted to comment and pick up on Gareth's point of the questioning the value of what we're doing now in analysing these films, which I think is a very central question as to why we're all here. And I'd just like to say that for me, I think there's an immense value in looking at these films, which historically are the sort of films that I wouldn't have been in the slightest bit interested in before becoming involved myself, not of my own choice, like everybody else. And comparing my personal experiences in dealing with the banks and financial institutions and lawyers, etc., with what I see appearing in the films as I'm watching them one by one. And that's led me to be thinking that so far what I've seen, I think they've been extremely well researched, and actually they're sort of putting their hitting the nail on the head at some of the key evil points of the film, and the way that the banks and financial institutions actually succeed in achieving their objectives in a way that I've seen clearly myself, and I'm sure we all have. I wrote down one particular line, which was from one of the senior chaps in the boiler room. I can't remember his precise name, but I think he was sort of imbuing Seth at one particular point about how he should be approaching his hard selling and how to steel himself and drive himself forward, as you know, which was quite a strong element of what was going on. And one of the phrases that, as I say, I wrote down was, "I don't even look at my customers." He was imbuing Seth to detach himself totally from the human element of what he was doing as a most deliberate policy. And I think this type of approach, though may be done much more subtly, is actually practiced by and at various different levels by a lot of the high street banks today, and very much goes on today, and is part. And I think the selection process of employees for the banks is that they're looking for people without great empathy, that are very bright, very greedy, and often very successful, young, testosterone finished. But you know, the girls have a place in this as well, I'm sure. Can't be too sexist about it, although it was a very sexist film in many respects, in that apart from the secretary, I don't think there were any girls at all operating, and they weren't, which I was quite surprised to hear, allowed to sell to women either.
Yeah.
Which was mentioned at one point, which I thought was a bit bizarre, but there we are. So for me, I think it's of huge value to sort of pick out the things that exemplify the worst elements of what are actually going on, what's actually going on today, and comparing it directly to those films.
Nigel, that's such an interesting set of thoughts. We'll go to Gareth in a moment. I saw he put his hand up just now. Just before we do, you've actually touched on something which is especially interesting, which is why are we doing this? You know, why is TTF running the film club? And there is a reason. It's my way, it's our way to open people's minds up to some of the stuff that actually really does happen. Of course, a film is a film and real life is real life, but many of these films actually reflect remarkably accurately what actually does go on. And it helps us understand that not everybody out there is a moral, you know, right, wrong kind of person. There are absolute nutcases out there. There are people out there who will do anything to get a bonus, and they won't even feel bad about the guy that they trod on to get there. In fact, some of them are actually turned on by it in some weird way. And there certainly were a few characters in that film who enjoy the process of exploiting a vulnerable client. It happens. It really does happen. So the reason we run these film club sessions is because it's frankly a great way to educate ourselves collectively about the sorts of drivers. Pretty much in every one of these film club sessions so far, there's a quote that's come up time and time again, which is the Charlie Munger quote: "Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome." You know, in the last film we watched, I forget the title of it, in the last film we watched, and in this one, it was all about the idea that if people are paid enough to do the wrong thing, they'll do it. You know, the vast majority of people will do the wrong thing. And I'm going to take the conversation somewhere pretty dark, and I'll only go there briefly. When I watch movies like The Boiler Room, it helps me understand the sorts of things that happen in wars. Yeah, when people do horrific things because they can somehow justify to themselves that it's the right thing to do because that's what the boss wants, that's what the general want, or the commander in chief wants. That's what the leader of the country wants. And you know, history is littered with all sorts of people who've ended up doing very much the wrong thing because they allowed themselves to be coerced and molded and manipulated and abused and exploited. So I genuinely do see some very dark parallels between what happens sometimes in financial services and frankly criminality with what happens in wider society. Gareth, to you. And then we'll go to Michaela.
I was stuck on mute there, and then my mouse got stuck. I wanted to come back to, I think Nigel was very good reminder, I suppose, of the line or the fact that they wouldn't sell to women. And I thought this this whole sort of through line throughout the film of sort of this macho attitude was actually very well done and very interesting. And that no selling to women, I thought, was an interesting part of it. And my best guess, I mean, they sort of explain it. It seemed to be because they've found in the past, they've tried it in the past, and they found that women were more likely to call back and say, you know, and spot earlier they've been ripped off. And maybe it's just that when men are ripped off, their pride is hurt and they're too ashamed to confront the problem, admit to have made a mistake, and perhaps maybe that's sort of what was going on. And whereas the women they've found will come straight back on the phone and say, what's going on? You haven't delivered as promised. And I think there really is something, or at least the film is making out that there's really something in the male ego being a massive part of this. Another quote, if you'll forgive me, is the older salesman saying, "It's about wood." It's basically just about getting a guy into a frame of mind where he's, you know, all excited about the kind of guy he's going to be when he's got all this money. And it ran all through the film. There was quite a few scenes of just brokers fighting other brokers. They're just all real sort of macho testosterone fueled guys. And the last thing, which I think is I'll bring up, which is along the same theme, is his relationship with his father.
Oh.
His father made it quite clear to him. I got another quote, if you'll forgive me. It's he says to his son, "Relationship? What relationship? I'm not your girlfriend. Relationships are your mother's shtick. I'm your father." And that kind of father-son relationship probably, if anything, left Seth's character vulnerable to these kind of guys, this idea of what a man is supposed to be. So these were just a few thoughts about sort of the macho element of the film. I just thought I'd put them out there, see if they brought anything up with anyone else.
Thanks, Gareth. Let's go to Kim and to Michaela. I'm sure it'll be very interesting to get the female perspective on these particular points and anything else. Kim, what do you reckon?
Well, I was going to say to Gareth, yes, I'd call back, but I would hope men would do that too, and maybe that's not the case. And I like Tom's quote that he said, "As every woman will tell you, men are much more gullible." That's very good, Tom. But I was also thinking about, and again, I didn't see the whole film, so I don't know how it ends. But the receptionist, PA, and how she talked about herself as a Black female. And, you know, I think at one point in time, Seth asked her, well, why does she work there and put up with all of that crap? And she said, because you won't find another job paying me $80K. Yeah. And that really stuck with me because, you know, I think a lot of people would have had that same opinion that she had, but was she also put into that role because it was and is probably much more difficult for her to get a high paying assistant role as a Black female single parent.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you very much indeed. I thought she was a lovely character. At one point, I thought she knew what was going on, but I'm not so sure she really did until the end of the film.
And that's what I didn't know, because I didn't see the end. And yeah. I just thought she kind of knew what was going on. But as you said, maybe not until the end.
Yeah. There certainly were some characters. I forget the guy's name, but the character played by Vin Diesel, he was quite kind of proactively turning a blind eye to anything. He knew there was stuff that was wrong, but he actively ignored it, you know. But he ended up doing the right thing at the very end in a way. Michaela, your thoughts, please.
Yes, I was thinking about the value of critical thinking and skepticism and get rich fast schemes, because the young wannabe brokers were there to out of greed, get rich fast, but also the client, I would say, he wanted to, to get rich. If people are more skeptical of these schemes, they wouldn't be such clients, I would say.
Yeah.
So not that I want to blame the victim, but all of these people can just go buy some ETFs, buy the SPY, and that's it. They fall for these people. I receive all the time. Our email inboxes are full of people who are got so rich, and they will show you their villas and their Lamborghinis. And now they got so rich that they want to share their method. So they wanted to subscribe, and they will send you the signals, buy, sell, or their methodology to their method to get rich. Yeah. So I think that that's very similar selling.
Yeah, for sure. And do you remember the pitch to the doctor at the very early part of the film? Do you remember that pitch?
Yes.
You could see he was being kind of motivated to want to buy, because the guy pitching to him was basically saying that, if it's not you buying this, then it'll be some other doctor, some other doctor. So I guess what they're able to do, these people, is to tap into this kind of this fear of loss. Is it called FOMO? Fear of missing out. That's a phrase one of my sons uses. Fear of missing out. This idea that if you miss out, then somebody else is going to get something you could have had. It's a very, very strong psychological driver, and they know how to play on these things to get people to do it.
Sorry, and I want to say that
Yes.
the rhetoric about the rich, and this I telling you how the rich get richer,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and it kind of tell these people that this is what the rich are doing. So if you want to get rich like the rich, then you know, I'll show you how.
Yes.
So I think a bit of toning down this would be helpful.
Just before we go to Paul, there was one bit of the film that I thought about quite a bit afterwards. I was trying to work out. Do you remember when they went to that chap's house and there was a load of them watching the movie on the sofa? And did you notice that he'd been in that house for a long time, but it looked like he'd only just moved into it? Yeah, and it just didn't look lived in at all. So that I think what they were saying to us there was that the person who bought the house bought that massive, great big mansion house, not because of the opportunity to kind of live in it and enjoy it. That almost seemed to be second to none. He just sat there on this little sofa inside this massive, great big room. It was just owning it. It was the status symbol of it that was the reason why he bought it. Fascinating stuff. Great movie, I thought. Mr. Carley. Exactly. Paul.
Yeah, I think, you know, that the status thing, and the ego thing is absolutely true. We've seen it before that, you know, if we approach a company we know has been a victim of something, if the treasurer or the person that, you know, has perhaps been duped is male, they won't pursue it. They will actually not go after the bank, you know, and claim back £250,000 because they're embarrassed that they allowed it to happen. You take that to a female executive, there's no such class. And the status thing, I actually know somebody that, you know, our children went to a private primary school, but I know somebody who sent their children there, and this, you know, not because he wanted them to have a good start in life. He sent them there because he wanted to be able to tell people he sent them there. It wasn't, you know, so there's this ego, there's this status symbol about things, and, you know, it is, and unfortunately it is a very male feature. And yeah, we've seen this, and a lot of time when you look at as well, you're just looking at the Blackmore Bond victims as well, and some of the you know, the approaches they made, and when people were telling you and showing you the interaction they had, it's the female investors that really did push back and asked really good questions. They wanted to see this, they wanted to see that. They weren't going to part with any money until they ticked all of these boxes, and they were still scammed because obviously they had, you know, they had all the answers and they could point to this thing and this FCA regulated thing. But there's a hell of a lot more due diligence that was undertaken by female investors. But it does go to show that it doesn't matter how careful you are, you know, you will still be a victim if they're that intense.
I think all of these, thanks, Paul. I think all of these comments on the sort of the male-female bit are very valid. There's that pretty famous Christine Lagarde quotation. Had it been Lehman Sisters, we probably wouldn't have had a global financial crisis. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. Let's go to Gareth. Gareth, have you got any other thoughts or any other slides that you'd like to share?
Yeah, one thought that I've sort of neglected to put in the slide, but that someone reminded me of it. Apologies, I can't remember who it was, but I did find it very interesting at the end that Vin Diesel's character, again, I don't remember his character's name, he did seem genuinely oblivious to the scam. He seemed to be very wrapped up in it, and he was clearly one of the best, if not the best, at undertaking the scam. But he made it very clear as well earlier in the film to Seth that the idea was not to ask any questions. And I think this comes back to, I think, the point Paul's made very well, which is that the way, you know, some people are, you know, amoral sociopaths, like you say, but a lot of people fall into this and never ask them the questions and never get confronted with that moment where they're like, this is wrong, I shouldn't do this, because they find ways, I think, to avoid encountering that question, or to kid themselves that, you know, everyone else is doing it, if I don't do it, someone else will do it.
Exactly. Has anybody ever worked in an environment like that or anything like that? Paul, let's go to you, and I'll then share my story. Paul.
basically every bank trading floor is like that to some extent. I mean, there's this, the one objective of any bank trading floor, which I spent 28 years working on, is to make money, to make financial gain, which is obviously a very important part of the Fraud Act 2006. So, but yeah, I mean, over the years, there was, you see people high-fiving, when they've closed out a big trade, and that the high-fiving has to have come at somebody else's expense. I mean, there was an infamous one at Lloyd's where, they worked for 3 days on this trade to scam a major private company, and they took about 2.5 million in undisclosed markups by engineering a structured trade that didn't need to be structured. There was a simple vanilla thing that they just could have done, and they did it purely to conceal 2.5 million of markups that was in the, and it's one thing that where these films, I was going to mention this earlier, they're all fantastic, and people can be forgiven for thinking, they've undergone the Hollywoodization, they've been exaggerated and everything else. But the one thing about these financial films that Hollywood loves is that you don't actually need to sensationalize what was really happening. If you watch Wall Street, if you watch what was the bearings, Rogue Trader, Nick Neeson one, I mean, fantastic. But all of these films, Wolf of Wall Street as well, the stories write themselves in terms of appealing to the public's appetite for these kind of things. But I would say that, I think it's called Swimming with Sharks. I think that's you are very conscious that, there's a whole floor full of them.
This definitely is real. I got into financial services in 1986, and a couple of years before that, I made a living selling advertising space, completely different line of work, but a high pressure sales environment. Nothing going on, as far as I knew anyway, that was illegal or dodgy. But the amount of sales, the sales culture was so strong. You'd have people, standing on the desk with a phone, all sorts of stuff going on, all about maximizing the amount of calls being made, maximizing the conversion rates. And when you're kind of, male in your early 20s, competitively minded, this is the very kind of environment that these people know how to exploit. And then when I got into financial services in 86, I worked for some right old ropey, old dodgy companies, and they really did not have a lot of morality on at all. And I ended up reporting some stuff going on, and the stuff I reported going on was not dealt with properly, and I was the problem for reporting it, if you get my drift. So I honestly can say that there's a lot of that kind of culture going on. And what's a real worry is that to some degree it still seems to be happening now. There's a couple of we'll go to Andy, then I'll go to a couple of questions. Andy, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to both agree and disagree in a little bit about bank trading floors. And it's funny, I was just looking behind me to see, I've got a book somewhere called The Death of Gentlemanly Capital by Philip Auger. And it's interesting. So my experience is probably a little different. And one of the things about the boiler room, it's based upon US securities markets, essentially. And they are fundamentally different from the UK, or they were, I should say. I think they still are, actually, but in a different way. And I think, in a sense, 30, 40 years ago, that would not have happened in the UK. However, I remember, and I sort of detected through the 80s, I would say, a shift in culture in trading rooms. So there was definitely a shift. So that I would say by the 90s, the kind of thing that Paul described would be absolutely common. But in the early 80s, you definitely had some very gentlemanly trading rooms. And actually, if you were trading what we would call a head-to-head market, where you asked another trader a price, and they were out, you would often ask them if they were sure before you traded on it, which would probably never happen. I mean, you don't have the head-to-head market in the same way. However, I did hear a really both sad and funny story. And it was in 1981. So 1981, the first half saw an absolute boom in the Japanese convertible bond market. And at Merrill Lynch, there was a young salesman called Brian Jones, and he was only in his early 20s, and he made an absolute fortune in the first half of 1981. And he was actually off one day, and the story was that he was off ill, and somebody said, "Where's Jones? Where's Jones?" And somebody joking said, "Oh, he's off. He's had a heart attack." And some guy jumped on the desk and said, "I heard it first. I want his client list."
I can believe
there was that kind of some kind of stuff going on in a way, but it was I think it was a bit tongue in cheek, but there was there was stuff that went on that was a bit even then.
I'm sure. Mr. Tom Levitt's got his hand up. Tom.
Yeah, it's a question really rather than a statement, but it's prompted by what Andy's just been saying, because another difference between now and 30 years ago is how much of all this trading is now automated. But presumably you build in the risk that you want into the algorithms that you're automating. So the automated systems can be just as ruthless, if not more so, because I'd love someone to tell me how that element that Andy's just been talking about has been affected by increased automation.
Well, really pleased
do you want to talk about it, Paul, or do you want me to?
I can actually say, FX Last Look is the primary example. Basically, this is it's actually, there has been cases. Barclays have been fined and settled. Basically, the automated process, what they were doing, they were building into the code. The end user or the client hits sell 50 million, and they put in what they call a speed bump to delay the confirmation to come back. So it might only be 500 milliseconds, sometimes a second. But what it does, it basically allows them to hold it, hope the price moves higher, in which case they'll say, yes, you're done. And then they sell at a higher price and lock in the difference. If the price moves lower, they just reject the trade. It's called Last Look, and it's been subject to multi-million pound lawsuits. And they were actually coding it in to the system. So it was a heads they win, tails you lose scenario.
Wow.
Go on, Andy, go on. I'm sure you've got one as well.
I was going to say, that's interesting. So I was a bond trader, so FN essentially, or money market securities, and it was completely. In the 80s, which was most of my trading career throughout the 80s, it was a voice market, and the way that price dissemination occurred really was through interdealer brokers. And if we had and there's a relevance to the automation here, I'll tell you. So if we had a big order to say sell, a big position in bonds from a customer, and you couldn't sell them all at once, so you had to go and effectively hit the market. So the way to make money out of it was actually to sell more than you had to sell and then buy some back when it was cheaper.
Yeah.
But the way to we used to spoof the market, and it was not dishonest in a sense. So basically what you might say, you want to keep the price up. So you give all the brokers a bid, and you bid for $1 million, and actually the round lot of, depending on the issue, might be 3 or 5 million. So you give 3 brokers a bid for $1 million. You go out and ask every bank what their price is and sell them 3 million or 5 million. So you get a load out. The broker comes back and sells you $1 million because you don't pull, you honestly don't pull your price. So you stand up to the trade, but at the end of it, now in the algorithmic world, actually, I worked with a guy at Deutsche Bank a decade ago who wrote Deutsche Bank's first algo plan, and they built in these spoofing algorithms into the algorithms for electronic trading. So essentially, you might have to sell a lot, but they would actually go out and buy small amounts. The algorithm would buy small amounts beforehand before they put it out. There's a book by Michael Lewis called Flash Boys. Anybody's read it, but
Flash Boys.
It's interesting. Yeah. He talks about front running, which I think actually when you read it, it isn't front running, it's outrunning, where some of the high frequency traders actually pick up the sell or buy signals from the banks and actually beat them to the next exchange.
Yeah.
So they're actually faster, and they are effectively buying incredibly fast connectivity to do that, to actually make, and they're making very small margins, but large amounts of, in large volume to actually effectively make money.
This is why they spend tens of millions of pounds putting cables across the Atlantic to reduce transmission time by a fraction of a second. Yeah,
that's it. And there's a story as well that one firm, it may have been Citadel or might have been BlackRock, bought the building next to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange to house their servers in there so that they were that much quicker. But I mean, what Andy says, I mean, what I was involved in the production or development of the first sort of FX trading platform in the late 90s called FX Trader when I was at UBS, really imaginative title. And they literally interviewed us, the coders, to understand what techniques we used in the market. Like what Andy said, there were times when you had to create a market to convince everybody there was a market, because you were wearing this amount of risk and you put these prices in the market. And but later on, when the algorithms started to take over the platforms, and you realize that if you put a buy order in the market, these algorithms would literally a mini price crash or price jump where they were all trying to outbid themselves. So you could see literally the market just move 8 points higher, no trades, they were just all out, because you put a buy order in. So when you were genuinely trying to buy, it was screwing you. So you ended up putting a buy order in, like we did in the old days when it was all voice, put a buy order in and then just try and walk the price up, but let them walk out for you and then go out and sell it. So you've got machine versus machine, but you've also still had an element of man versus machine, although that man versus machine is becoming less and less. But it was one of the, but it's the evolution of a market. People come in, they program these things to pick up on fine demand and anything that we can front run and get in front of, because basically the sole objective, we had to write this for a lawyer the other day actually, the sole objective of anybody in the market is what's going to happen next on price. That's it. Well, it might be the next second, it might be the next 10-second, day, week, but that's your objective. So these algos are all out there. They're looking to detect buy and sell orders, which would indicate that there's a probability the market's going to move this way or that. So, that's what they're doing all day long. And when you're a human being in the middle of that environment, you spend as much time trying to fool them as you do trying to manage your own risk. It's but a far cry from what I was doing 25 years ago, 30 years ago.
Wow, really interesting stuff. Well, the last film club session we ran, correct me if I'm wrong, Gareth, was margin call, wasn't it? Yeah. And I've just had a thought about one of the common denominators between an aspect of the film margin call and an aspect of this film is the role of the compliance officer or the risk manager. So in the film we just watched, Boiler Room, the compliance bloke was obviously in on it, wasn't he? He was shredding stuff. He was completely useless. He's obviously been bought, so his job is basically to pretend to be a compliance bloke, but not be one. And in the last film as well, Margin Call, there was the lady character, I've forgotten her name. She kind of knew what was going on, but didn't really properly report it. She did report it, but she didn't kind of follow through. So clearly this whole kind of risk management framework doesn't work if the people responsible for risk management are actually happy to turn a blind eye to the whole thing for one reason or another. And but the last topic I'd like us to cover, if it's okay with everybody, is the way the authorities reacted. So I know it was just a film, I know that, but if I knew nothing at all about financial services and I watched that film and the authorities, as happened in the film, became aware of what was going on, they had reason to be suspicious, they behaved exactly as I would expect them to. They would basically covertly investigate what was going on, they'd infiltrate the situation, then at the right time in the right way, when they got enough evidence, they go in and kind of blast the place open and arrest all the baddies. That is exactly what I would expect to happen if I wasn't in financial services. And frankly, even if having been in financial services for many, many years, that's kind of what I would expect to happen in the UK. And one of the most disturbing things, and that's not an exaggeration, one of the most disturbing things I've witnessed in my last year or so is having many people like Paul and many others, you know, too many for it to be a kind of coincidence, basically saying that they gave evidence to, or they were aware that others gave evidence to the authorities, but the authorities for some weird reason didn't act. Does anybody have any comments on that? Is there a stark contrast between what happened in the film in terms of the authorities' behaviour and what seems to be happening amongst, for example, the FCA? Nigel, thank you.
I was just thinking I could offer to pay for a copy of the film for the FCA, and they could use the film as a training manual.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's really interesting. And why do you say that, Nigel?
Well, it's tongue in cheek, because it couldn't have been further from the truth from the perceived way, certainly in recent history, that the FCA have been operating. It's poles apart.
Yeah, I might well do something with that idea, Nigel. It's a cracking idea. I think Gareth wanted to say something then, Tom, and then we'll go to Paul. Gareth? And
yeah, I was going to say it was very interesting that when they showed the FBI turning up to do the raid, there were a couple of obviously the FBI official cars. Then there were tow trucks, and then they had the buses full of the extra staff.
Was that for the Ferrari, Gareth?
Well, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, yeah, because you know if they're coming along, they would seize all the assets and everything. But yeah, it was interesting that in the film, you know, you saw this convoy of vehicles turning into the car park, but the second vehicle along was a tow truck on both lanes. You know,
that's a great spot. Yeah, I suspect, answering your question, that's got to be filing cabinets, hasn't it? Probably not something that would happen now. Everything's in the cloud, but that'd be my guess.
One quick great spot. Did you notice that when there was a shot of the car park, the cars were always parked in the same place? Did you notice that? And in all honesty, in those sorts of environments, those sorts of organisations, there's a massive, great big hierarchy about who gets to park their car where. So at first, I thought they were just reusing the same shop, but they actually weren't. They were actually making a point that there's a status pecking order, even in the car park, who gets to park their car where. Yeah. I think Gert wanted to make a point. Gert, to you, and then to Tom, then to Paul.
Yeah, you were talking about the authorities taking action, etc. So going back now, sort of from 87 to sort of 2003, 2004, they used to sell car stereo systems and alarms and things like that. Yeah. So invariably, you get you attract the sort of people who buy the flash Mercs and the BMWs and everything, and they've got to have the loudest stereo and all that sort of thing. So we used to have this customer who used to turn up quite regularly with a new BMW, and then he'd turn up with his dad's Mercedes and all this sort of thing. And then a few years after we closed the business, I had a visit from a HMRC inspector, and he was investigating VAT fraud. Yeah, by these people, and so they asked me a whole load of questions and everything, and I told them whatever I could tell them, and I think they asked me if I could dig out some copy invoices of anything that they'd bought, etc. So did all of that, and then I can't remember why, but about 6 months afterwards, the guy called me about something completely unrelated from this previous inquiry, and I just asked him. I said, "Oh, so how do you get on with the other one?" And he said, "We've dropped the charges." And I'm thinking, well, that doesn't make sense, because clearly these people were spending a lot of money which they couldn't really justify showing as declared earnings, etc. And I knew they'd bought some big houses locally and all this sort of stuff, so clearly there was a lot of VAT that was being siphoned off and carousel fraud or whatever they were doing. But yeah, he just said that they closed the case and that was it. So
interesting. I wonder how much of that goes on. I really do wonder how much of that goes on. I think Tom wanted to make a point, didn't it, Tom?
Just very briefly, and apologies to Kim because she hasn't seen the end, so maybe you want to close your ears. But I thought what was interesting at the end, I mean, we had this ongoing theme from the father saying, "You are putting my career at risk by what you're doing." And then right at the very end, of course, it was the father who sold him out. The father was collaborating with the FBI right at the end of it. And I just thought one of the takeaway messages might be, we can all be ruthless when the chips are down.
Quite possibly, quite possibly. I thought the kind of the reconnecting between the father and the son made it a very sweet film at the end, I thought, personally. Let's go to Paul, and then we'll see if anybody else has anything to say before we wrap up. Mr. Carlier.
Yeah, I think I think we'd all like to think that, you know, if you produce evidence of wrongdoing or fraud, that the authorities will look at it, do some more investigating themselves, and then just, as you say, come mob-handed, battering down the door and taking everyone into custody and all the evidence into custody as well. And it does happen, all too rarely. But I did actually tweet something on this over the weekend, that the quality of the investigation is there's almost a direct correlation with the level of exposure of those within the hierarchy of oversight. It really is. I think if you look at LIBOR, FX, and everything else, everything was, it was a shocking investigation. I mean, even though action was taken in the end, it was still engineered so that the banks, the boards, and everything else would escape, and there'd be a few people would be prosecuted. And keep your eyes on Tom Hayes' appeal, because I think we gave him some evidence that was handed to us that I'm sure will not only exonerate him and see his conviction overturned, but we'll also see some serious people in the dock themselves for perjury. And
wow.
Premier FX is one that's going on right now as well. The FCA they so badly dropped the ball. Barclays were clearly involved, and the quality of the FCA final notice, it should have Dulux on the top, not the FCA branding, because it is probably the single worst whitewash I've seen in recent times. And that's saying something by FCA standards. It's and the reason being because the FCA's, they dropped the ball. Barclays, clearly things happened that should never have been allowed to happen. And hey ho, there you go. That is proportionate to the quality of the investigation and the outcome. So,
very, very interesting line of thought, Paul. Thank you very much. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say before we start bringing matters to a close? Mr. Cairns.
Yeah, just briefly. Earlier on, I saw a text message coming up on the screen from Mike McGrath asking me for further details about what I was saying earlier on.
Yes.
I see his screens. I don't know if he's going to put a shilling in the meter, but I can't see him anymore. Oh, there he is. There he is. I just want to, you can get my details from Andy.
Yeah, no problem.
And please do give me a ring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mike put his email address into the chat, Nigel. So you've.
Oh, right. Well, in that case, I'll email him. I'll find that afterwards then.
Yeah. So it's
okay. That's good.
It's in the chat there. Okay. Very good. I think Paul wanted to say something as well. Go for it, Paul.
Yeah. It's totally separate. I was just wondering if, there's 3 films. I don't know if they've come up before, but
go for it.
Might be worth making a note of future. I don't know if anyone's seen the recent film Dark Waters involving Mark Ruffalo. It's the DuPont story. It's a true story, absolutely shocking. And what you'll see is the same, although this is a chemical pollutant, they literally have polluted the entire population of the world. It's in our DNA. And this is the story of how it happened, how it was allowed to happen, and the corporate and political cover-up. And anyone who's been through the financial mill in this respect will sympathise with the same obstacles and the way that these things are managed by those that are on the hook. That it's an incredibly powerful film. There's one called Crime of the Century that was only recently released. It's about the opioid crisis in America. The same thing, large firms behind it, and it exposes corporate and political corruption right up to the head of the DOJ. Astonishing documentary. And another one was quite a few years old now, but it's called Hot Coffee. And it's basically, there's an infamous case in America where you probably might have heard of it, where a woman got millions.
Oh, yeah, the coffee was too hot, so she sued.
Exactly. So she sued and won millions. And, it was actually plastered all over the media and everything else, and it was spun in a way that, oh my God, like, I mean, how ridiculous. The world's gone crazy. These kind of awards are just, well, what it was the PR firms of all these big corporates, they all got together, formed this organisation with intent to use this to change legislation. They funded political battles all over the country to see that certain judges got elected in certain districts.
Wow.
I mean, it's an astonishing, and what it is, the story we don't actually know is that basically the temperature, they'd broken all kinds of laws in regard to the temperature of this coffee. It had to be, and this woman suffered burns like you wouldn't believe, but that was never exposed. They used it to make a PR machine got hold of it.
They belittled it, right?
And this documentary exposes how they then went about literally corrupting the entire judicial framework in the States and creating an unlevel playing field. It's an astonishing piece of work. It really is.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for those suggestions, Paul.
I'm aware that chat there.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm aware that Mike McGrath's got a question. We'll get to that. The next TTF Film Club session is actually a documentary. It's a really, really good one. I encourage you to come along to it. So it's called Saving Capitalism. That's going to be 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. on the 28th of June. Similar setup to what we've got tonight. I hope you enjoy watching it. I hope you enjoy participating as well. Mr. McGrath, let's go to you, please.
Yes, thanks, Andy. I'm sorry, I missed the last movie club. Was the film Final Stage?
No, it was Margin Call. The last
Margin
one.
Call, sorry.
Yeah. What is Final Stage? I've not heard of that.
No, I have my wires crossed. It was
Okay.
yeah. Do you know the film was about obviously a bank that was investing. Yeah. Does anybody know what bank that was based on?
I read supposedly it was deliberately a made-up bank. I guess they kind of took things from what was happening across the industry without making it identifiably one bank, probably to save themselves from a lawsuit. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Of course.
Welcome. All right. I think the very final thing I'd like to do is just pass to Gareth for any final comments from him before I bring things to a close. Gareth, any final comments from yourself about the movie or anything else?
Oh, just a couple of things very quickly. I have taken down those films, so thank you, Paul. If anyone else has any films they want to recommend, I am starting a list. We have a list sort of running us up to the end of this year, but we've now got quite a promising looking list for next year as well. So do keep them coming in. I just had a couple of what I called fun facts, not super fun, I suppose, but the first is that the plot for this film was, at least to a large part, based on chats the director had with Jordan Belfort, who's of course the famous writer of The Wolf of Wall Street, which was also made into a film, which we will be covering later this year. That is in our current list. And also just sort of adding to the idea that this is a very real world scenario and that truth is stranger or more disgusting than fiction. The screenwriter, it was a writer-director, Ben Younger, and he wrote the script after interviewing for a job at a brokerage firm called Sterling Foster, apparently. And he said he walked in, immediately realized, this is my movie. I mean, you see these kids and you know something is going on. So that start of the film, you can imagine that there was a very similar situation this writer had been in. So it's very much based on real life. That's all I wanted to say on the matters. So I think I'm done. We've covered off when the next film's going to be. So
thank you very much indeed, Gareth. Can we all show our appreciation to Gareth? He puts a fair amount of time, as it shows, into organising and preparing these sessions. You're doing a superb job, Gareth. You really are. I'm enjoying these sessions more and more and more. Wonderful job. Okay, folks, enjoy the rest of your afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Lovely to have Ed and Michaela all the way from Canada with us as well. And have a good rest of your time today. Thank you, folks. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.